Does California suffer from a skills gap or an opportunity gap? Some think the systemic exclusion of diverse talent from access to education, economic security, quality jobs, and career mobility not only hurts California's economy, but it's tearing at California's social fabric. Our guest is Don Howard, the CEO of the James Irvine Foundation, that's working to help California's low-income workers, many of whom that reside in the San Joaquin Valley, have the opportunity to advance economically. We'll ask him about the structural changes that he thinks will be needed to create a more equitable economy, one that unlocks the potential of all of the state's workers.
Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world, California Emerging Technology Fund, and
Fresno State, where bold begins.
The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Era Energy LLC, BNSF Railway, E&J Gallo Winery, and Harris Ranch and Inn. Thank you. From the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Nonprofits play an important role in enhancing the public's well-being. The James Irvine Foundation is one of California's leading philanthropies, and it's taken a special interest in the San Joaquin Valley. The question is why? Our guest is going to tell us. He is the president and CEO of the James Irvine Foundation, Don Howard. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Well, thank you, Mark, for having me.
Well, listen, I'm sure our audience has heard of the James Irvine Foundation. Frankly, who hasn't? But can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But first, I just have to say my heart is aching for California right now. I know the Creek Fire by you is causing tremendous devastation, and our coastline is covered with the fog and the soot and the smoke coming from the fire. So it is a tremendously difficult time for the state. And we have a pandemic ravaging our communities, particularly our Black and brown residents who are being disproportionately hit. And we have violence against Black and brown men. We have social unrest in the streets. And I just feel like this is one of the most difficult periods our state has gone through in our history. And I take some optimism in the great work that's being done in places like in California and from the leaders that we get to support at Irvine who are doing amazing work in those communities and more. But let me tell you just a word or two about Irvine. We're an independent foundation, which means we're not associated with any company or family at this point. And our focus is exclusively on California. We're 85 years old, and our benefactor left what now adds up to about $2.5 billion to benefit the people of California. Our mission is to ensure opportunity for all Californians, and we have one goal. Our goal is to ensure that every low-income California worker has the power to advance economically. And we're blessed and privileged to be able to give away about $105 million a year to do that.
I'm interesting, recently your focus has really been on ensuring low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Why do you think that's one of the most important issues facing California?
Well, first and foremost, the economy is just not working for all Californians. For too long, the benefits of our growth have really accrued to just the wealthiest in our communities, the top of the income ladder. Wages for everybody else have been stagnant or even declined in some segments. And the cost of living goes up day by day. Childcare, housing driving the cost disproportionately, but it's just too hard to live in California, get ahead, and move into the middle class. Frankly, the California dream is in peril. We recognize that. I don't think that's news to others who live in the state. And we need to rethink our economy. And there's a bunch of data that backs this up. So for instance, 2019, United Way did a survey and found that 3.8 million California families, 90% of which had a working adult in them, struggled to cover basic needs. In 2018, California's top 10% of earners made 6.4 times the income of the bottom 20%, which saw wages decrease.
Yeah, and housing has a lot to do with poverty levels in California, the cost of housing. But, I was going to ask you about some of the challenges and opportunities that are timing up. But I want to ask, let's just jump forward and talk about specifically some of the key initiatives that you're trying to address, you're engaged in to address some of these issues.
Yeah, well, we go about our work in these initiatives, which are basically specific grant-making areas with clear outcome goals and a budget to make them happen. One that I can share with you is called Better Careers. We've made a $110 million investment over 7 years to scale up the best workforce development programs in the state. These are programs that help low-wage workers build the skills to get a good job, and then a better career. Our goal there is 25,000 low-wage workers in better jobs, and that's our baseline goal. And some of the grantees that we invest in Inland California, you might know Bitwise and their Geekwise Academy. You might know State Center Community College District and their apprenticeship program, or Growth Sector and their IT apprenticeships. But those give you some examples of our Better Careers initiative.
Yeah, when you say better wages, I mean, you're not talking minimum wage, you're talking something substantially higher.
Yeah, we think about statewide a fair wage being somewhere getting on toward $20 an hour, and then higher in communities with higher costs. But you got to start with a good job. And one of our goals is that those jobs provide dignity, provide a chance to skill up, provide benefits, and a chance to really step up into a better career and into
I don't want to tell you this, but actually, as a graduate student at Wisconsin, I worked for a labor economics professor. I was his graduate assistant, and we were doing, I'm going to date myself here, we were doing a study on CETA, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act from the 70s, and they were looking at different programs to get people out of poverty. I remember, it sticks with me, this was, many years ago, a training program for shoe repair people in Philadelphia that was very successful of getting people out of poverty. So it sounds like in some ways, this is the most current iteration of some of the programs that have occurred to kind of get people out of poverty into higher paying jobs.
Yeah, without going into the lessons from CETA, which were actually quite interesting,
right.
The kind of jobs now that are really great entry-level jobs, there's tons of skilled trade opportunities. And I have a lot of optimism, despite the horribly difficult time we're living through, that jobs in infrastructure, manufacturing would be great entry-level, better career jobs for folks in California. Healthcare is in that category as well. There's tremendous healthcare jobs. We've got to find those sectors of the economy. We've got to help folks get into those jobs that'll be good jobs after COVID.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about here is the inclusive economy. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. This is Mark Kepler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Don Howard, the president and CEO of the James Irvine Foundation. When you were talking, I think I cut you off there. You were talking about some other initiatives that you're engaged in. Why don't you go ahead and finish that thought?
Yeah, well, I mentioned our Better Careers initiative. We have two others. We have an initiative called Fair Work, which is a $90 million investment over 7 years to scale up worker centers that support and represent low-wage workers in different parts of the economy. An example there is the Warehouse Workers Alliance in a Warehouse Workers Resource Center in the Inland Empire. Our third initiative, which I think will be really important to the listeners and watchers of this program, is our Priority Communities Initiative, and we can go into a little more depth there. That's trying to support leaders in communities that want their economies to include everyone and prosper for all.
Okay, so we will talk about that in a moment, but I want to ask you about this thing. You see this term used quite a bit, this term inclusive economies. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, inclusive economies, and we've gotten this notion from the leaders and the community grassroots groups that we support, but you see it across the country. Inclusive economies provide opportunity for everybody to advance economically. They're built on the ideas and priorities from the community, and all of its residents. They eliminate racial disparities in economic opportunity, and they provide a level playing field where all workers have the chance to succeed, not just those with wealth.
It seems like when I was reading this stuff, it seems to me like, you hear this, the digital divide, you hear about the achievement gap. This looks like an opportunity gap is really what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for too long, we've acted like there really is such a thing as a completely unfettered free market. In reality, markets have policies and regulations and investments that get made that create them. And we need to create economies in Inland California that are that those decisions are being made by the residents, not by folks.
Well, it frankly recognizes what we all recognize, and that's, we've said this for years, right? It's who you know. And that also plays a role in some of this. Well, let me ask you, you're talking about this Priority Communities Initiative. What's that about?
So we've set aside $135 million, and I was so pleased to see our board view this in the context of the epidemic. We've been developing the idea in advance, but in March, we committed $135 million to 5 communities: Fresno, Stockton, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Salinas. And there we're supporting the best leaders from the grassroots and those leaders from civic organizations who want to come together to set priorities for the economy such that the economy can provide everybody with the California dream, not just those with money.
Yeah, I want to also talk about racial equity also seems to be a big part of your, well, you call it your North Star.
Right.
Why? Why is that considered? What do you consider that your North Star?
Well, so we've set a goal, which is a little unique as a foundation. We have one singular goal, ensuring that all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. But about 75% of low-income workers are workers of color. So almost by definition, our goal is focused on workers of color. And it's also true that those workers struggle mightily and more so than others. So one of our goals, and we're trying to do more even now, is to dedicate more resources to address those barriers that Black, Brown, Asian, Pacific Islander community members face when they're trying to get a job and step up and get to the California dream.
It's interesting. I've been in the Valley for over 30 years, and I have to say, you see this growing momentum to kind of deal with some of these systemic challenges that have faced historically, these groups when it comes to economic inequality. Is it just me, or are there more opportunities than in the past?
Well, there's certainly a good deal of opportunity coming out of the crisis. Pre-crisis, pre-COVID, and the racial reckoning and the other crises that we're dealing with right now in the fires, there was a lot of growing momentum in communities to do things right by low-income workers. I think everybody, and I say this because I speak with a lot of wealthy individuals about their philanthropy, but folks from all quarters are recognizing the economy wasn't working. It was stilted too much toward the wealthy and was leaving lots and lots of people behind. And that's just it's not good for our economic success, and it's also not good for our souls. So folks were already committed to doing better, but now with the crises, I think there's a moment where we can reset the economy in ways that can profoundly benefit those who've been left behind.
Okay, well, up next, we're going to talk about what the public sector role is in all of this. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Don Howard, the president and CEO of the James Irvine Foundation, about their focus on ensuring low-income workers are able to advance economically in California. So I know there's a lot of cross-sector collaboration between the public, the private, and nonprofit sectors. Why is that now more important than ever?
Well, residents and workers don't live in a single sector. They have a job with a private employer. They take advantage of public services. We all do, roads and streets and bridges, as well as workforce services, and nonprofits and community groups support them throughout their lives. So people don't live in isolation, and that's why we have to work together to make sure that economic opportunity comes about through collaboration. And we're seeing great examples of this. Projects like what is going on in Fresno called Drive have grassroots leaders, civic leaders, elected politicians, and employers and philanthropy sitting around the table trying to make the economy in that community work for everybody.
Yeah, and I think you see that more as a very successful model. I actually come to mind. I think of, for example, UC Merced and the partnership that they've had in building their campus was a public-private partnership. You're seeing more of that, which is a way to kind of get more use out of more efficient and effective use of those limited dollars that we have.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you about this COVID-19 pandemic. It's been something, and it seems to me that it really hasn't so much changed the needs that really things that need to be addressed, but really highlighted the things that need to be addressed. Would you agree?
Well, that, and I think it's accelerated things. So it's highlighted for sure that there are job categories that are riskier jobs, lower paying jobs, folks who are forced to live more on the margins because of the nature of their work. And if essential work really means essential work, let's start paying those workers what they're due. So I think it's made things like that more transparent. It's made racial disparities profoundly transparent. Health outcomes, as well as the economic outcomes, are far disproportionately skewed to workers of color and families of color. I think it's accelerated some trends too. I think we're going to see an acceleration of some industries declining and some new ones taking shape. And so we've got to get ready for the post-COVID economy and make a new agreement about how that economy is going to work for everybody.
One part of this, though, is we've done some stuff on telehealth and distance learning. And if you think about, what we're talking about here is the opportunity gap with low-wage workers, but there's also, like we talked about earlier, the achievement gap and the digital divide, that if you want to access online education, but you're poor, you don't have the computer, you don't have broadband or telehealth or telework, really impacting lower wage workers.
Yeah, well, a lot of lower wage jobs can't be done from home. I think that's one of the disparities that has driven some of the health outcomes. But it's also true, if you look past the epidemic, we're going to need to invest dramatically in infrastructure. And one category is ensuring that everybody has broadband and can participate in the new economy, which is going to be even more online. We also need infrastructure investments in a clean energy system and a reconfigured energy system that's safe, doesn't sprout fires along the way. Those are going to be great jobs, and we need a lot of them. So those are a couple of the areas we're looking at for new job growth.
You're saying that some of your work is focusing, a lot of your work is focusing here in the Valley. Can you give us some interesting examples of some of this cross-sector partnerships that are occurring here in the Valley? You mentioned Drive as one, for example.
I mentioned Drive. Yeah, that's been a flagship, really. And it was from the community, by the community, setting a new economic development plan for the Fresno area. You mentioned UC Merced. There's a great project that's part of this. That's a food innovation corridor. There's another project trying to bring second offices for large California employers into inland California. And the list kind of goes on and on. But those are priorities that came from community conversations where the playing field was level and everybody had a chance to provide input. And I think that kind of solid basis is going to lead to the diverse economy of the future that gives everybody an opportunity to succeed.
It's interesting you say that, because I was involved, we have self-help transportation tax, they're called Measure C. And back in the early 2000s, I was involved with that. And they had a executive committee and other people from the community to come in to give their input. And the executive committee was primarily comprised of the traditional leaders of the community. And one of them was on a hot mic, didn't realize it, and said, "What are these people doing here?" And that really, it kind of surprised me that they didn't want public input, frankly, in the process. So this is a change, and it's been going on for some time.
And it's not a surprise. The power's been held by folks who have money or who have access to folks who have money. And that's meant that the economy has worked for that segment, those folks who get to make the decisions. We have to make sure everyone's voices are heard. And if everyone has a chance to set those priorities, the economy can work for everybody. And it can address racial disparities in ways that are authentic and true that have been overlooked for far too long.
Yeah. Well, up next, we're going to talk about building that inclusive economy. It's going to happen if you have willing and able workers, but you also have to have willing and able employers. How can employers be involved in this process? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. So the goal here is to build an economy that benefits everyone. How do we ensure that California's low-income workers in particular are able to advance economically? That's the question for our guest, President and CEO of the James Irvine Foundation, Don Howard. So let's talk a little about the employer's role in this process generally, and then small employers in particular.
Yeah, well, employers are obviously provide jobs to folks. They're critical for economic success. And we've lost our way a bit here, where there used to be this relationship with employers where you could count on longer employment and benefits and upward mobility, but that's all changed. And I think high road employers in the state, which we're seeing a lot of, are realizing that reinvesting in their human capital and their talent has a great return on investment, and it's great for their communities and ultimately for the market. So employers are thinking differently, and I think that's something that's exciting. A lot of employers are small employers. In fact, some are quite small employers and are really micro businesses. And some of those have been hurt the hardest by the epidemic. 40% of Black-owned businesses in Fresno have had to close up shop since the epidemic. And then that is an opportunity. And folks like the Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce, who are grantees of ours, are working hard to make sure those employers can provide great new business opportunities, new job opportunities for their communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was doing a little research and I found there was a study that showed that 20% of computer science grads are Black, Latino, or Hispanic, but they only represent 10% of the tech workforce and only 2% of the venture startup founders. And they talk about systemic underinvestment, et cetera. So some of these issues happen throughout the economy, obviously. So let me ask another question. In terms of some examples of programs or projects that are trying to build the inclusive economy here in the Valley, what kind of examples can you give us?
Well, I think I mentioned the food innovation corridor that's coming out of Drive, as well as the second office project. There's also a whole investment in micro enterprises, speaking of small business owners, that are part of the Drive process. It's also exciting to see Stockton, Modesto, and that area beginning to come together to do their own inclusive economic development plan and to start setting some priorities that are sort of bottom up from the community for those parts of our state. The leadership of folks like Mayor Tubbs really is providing, I think, a great chance for that economy to reset as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of looking at it from kind of a 30,000 foot level, but also when you get down specifically to employers, there are things that employers can do to help make sure that traditionally marginalized folks are getting in that pathway to better paying jobs. Like they can have really good on the job training programs. They can have mentoring programs. I think that one of the things I've seen is some companies actually evaluate their executives on how well they mentor minorities and women. So those are all kinds of ways that employers can be involved in the process of building an inclusive economy.
Yeah, we work with employers to help them identify diverse talent for entry-level positions, and then think through the career pathways inside their corporations, and frankly, how those career pathways can connect to a next job in another business. Helping folks plan for their careers and investing in them is good for that time they're with you, but it's also good for their careers, because if the economy's stronger, your business is stronger, and the economy's not going to be strong unless residents have the resources to be participants in the economy.
Yeah, you can't afford not to tap into that talent, right? It's a disadvantage to you if you're not getting, the best people.
Short-sighted employers are going to find that they're going to lose out compared to those that re-embrace investing in their talent.
And that's only going to be true as the labor market tightens. The baby boom generation is retiring, and you have to find people to replace them. And you've got to look to places you haven't looked before.
We're seeing employers in entertainment right now in Southern California realizing that not only do they do wrong by the community by not hiring diverse talent, their products aren't as good. They now realize they need diverse talent in front of the camera, behind the camera, on the sets to make the best product for sale. And so they're realizing it's a business imperative to think about equity and equitable hiring.
Well, I want to end with something. We've gone through a lot. 2020 has been an interesting year, to say the least. I want to end on a positive. When you think about, you heard that phrase that crisis really represents two things: danger and an opportunity. And you see what's going on with the recent unrest, and really the focus and attention on racial equality, the COVID pandemic, and what that's all wrought. Is this really an opportunity for us to really change the way things happen in terms of the economy, and in particular, the plight of the low-wage worker?
Absolutely. And frankly, this is what gets me out of bed on the worst days, is knowing that this may be the chance that we've been waiting for to make some dramatic changes in how our economy works and what that compact is between employers and employees. Things that were incremental before, and now maybe we can take much bigger steps to reimagine our economy to work for everybody.
Yeah, and we're talking here about systemic change. So we're talking about big things. So anyway, I want to thank our guest, Don Howard with the James Irvine Foundation, for this very interesting conversation. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can read the Maddy Daily. You can find that by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Institute. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.